The little white wolf cub was bleeding into the snow. Every hunter in the northern forest wanted him dead. Every slave trader wanted the reward. And every soldier of the Alpha King was searching for him before sunrise. But none of them expected the person who would find him first. She wasn't a warrior. She wasn't a royal. She wasn't even part of a powerful pack. She was a woman the world had already forgotten. When Lyra knelt in the freezing snow to open the iron trap crushing the tiny wolf's leg, she had no idea she was touching the last surviving prince of the Alpha King's bloodline. One act of kindness would make the most powerful army in the kingdom surround her lonely cottage before dawn. One frightened orphan boy would risk everything to follow her. One hidden conspiracy would expose the darkest secret inside the royal council. And one broken Alpha King, who had spent years mourning his lost family, would soon discover that destiny had not found him through power. It had found him through compassion. This is the story of the woman who protected a lost wolf cub from hunters and changed an entire kingdom before the sun rose. The forest did not welcome travelers that night. It buried their footsteps. It swallowed their voices. It hid every secret beneath layers of fresh white snow until the world looked untouched, as though no sorrow had ever walked beneath the frozen pine trees. But sorrow had been there. It had simply learned how to wear silence. Far beyond the villages, where no smoke rose from chimneys and no warm lights waited behind windows, a lonely figure moved carefully between the towering pines. Her name was Lyra. She carried a bundle of dry branches across one shoulder, her thick grey cloak dusted with snow. The winter wind pushed loose strands of dark hair across her face, but she barely noticed. She had lived alone for so many years that the cold had become another neighbor. She knew which streams froze first. She knew which wolves hunted deer instead of people. She knew which trees creaked before heavy snow fell from their branches. Most importantly, she knew when the forest sounded wrong. Tonight, it sounded wrong. She stopped walking. The wind disappeared. No birds called. No foxes searched beneath the snow. Even the trees seemed to be holding their breath. Lyra slowly lowered the bundle of firewood. Her hand instinctively reached for the small hunting knife hanging from her belt. She listened. Nothing. Then, a sharp metallic snap echoed somewhere ahead. Not loud. Not natural. It sounded like iron biting flesh. Her heart tightened. She followed the sound. Each careful step carried her deeper into untouched snow until she reached a narrow clearing hidden between ancient pines. At first, she saw only blood. Small crimson drops stained the white ground. Fresh. Still steaming against the ice. Then she saw the trap. An iron hunting trap lay half buried beneath snow, its jagged teeth clamped tightly around the tiny leg of a snow-white wolf cub. The little creature struggled weakly. Its cries were almost gone. Every movement only forced the cruel metal deeper into its leg. Lyra closed her eyes for one brief second. "Hunters," she whispered. The steel trap wasn't meant for ordinary wolves. Its heavy chains were forged to hold magical creatures. She glanced around. Fresh boot prints surrounded the clearing. The hunters could not be far away. Logic told her to leave. If the hunters returned, they would assume whoever freed the cub had stolen valuable prey. People had disappeared over far smaller misunderstandings. She should walk away. She should protect herself. Instead, she knelt. The frightened cub bared its tiny teeth. It growled with all the courage its little body possessed. "I know," Lyra whispered gently. "You think I'm another monster." The cub snapped toward her trembling hand. Its blue eyes were filled with terror rather than anger. Lyra didn't pull away. Instead, she slowly removed her thick wool scarf. "There. No one is hurting you now." She carefully wrapped the cub's muzzle, not tightly enough to frighten it, only enough to stop it from biting while panic ruled its instincts. Then she placed both hands on the frozen steel trap. The iron was old. Rust had begun eating away at its hinges. Still, it refused to move. Lyra gritted her teeth. Every muscle in her arms burned as she forced the jaws apart little by little. The cub cried out, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm almost there." The metal suddenly gave way. The tiny wolf collapsed into the snow. Its injured leg shook uncontrollably. Blood soaked the white fur. Lyra quickly wrapped the wound with a strip torn from her own sleeve. "There. You'll live." The cub stared at her. Its frightened breathing slowly became quieter. Then, something unexpected happened. Instead of running away, the little wolf crawled toward her. It rested its tiny head against her knee. Lyra blinked. "You're supposed to run." The cub refused. It simply leaned against her as though it had already decided where it belonged. Before Lyra could understand why, voices echoed through the forest. "Search every trail. The cub can't have gone far." A second voice laughed. "Dead or alive, we'll still get paid." Lyra's expression hardened. Hunters. Closer than she expected. She gently lifted the exhausted cub into her arms. Its body was surprisingly warm despite the freezing night. She stepped behind the nearest pine. That was when she saw them. Not hunters. Slave traders. 5 large wagons slowly moved through the forest path beyond the clearing. Heavy chains rattled against frozen wood. Children. There were children inside. Some looked no older than 6. Others barely reached 12. Their hands were tied. Iron collars rested around their necks. Their thin clothing offered almost no protection against the winter wind. One little girl had fallen asleep sitting upright because there was no room to lie down. A boy quietly cried beside her. No one comforted him. No one could. The traders rode beside the wagons carrying long whips. One guard yawned lazily. "They'll fetch a better price south of the mountains." Another laughed. Especially the wolf children. The first shrugged. "If they survive the trip." The words settled over the forest like poison. Lyra remained perfectly still. Her heartbeat pounded inside her ears. She wanted to move. She wanted to help. She wanted to stop every wagon before another child disappeared forever. But she couldn't. 5 armed men. Only 1 knife. And a wounded wolf cub already depending on her. Sometimes courage wasn't choosing between fear and bravery. Sometimes it was choosing which life could still be saved. Tears gathered silently in Lyra's eyes. "I'm sorry." She wasn't speaking to herself. She was speaking to every child she couldn't reach. The wagons rolled slowly past. Then something happened. A small boy stumbled while walking beside the final cart. His chains tangled beneath his feet. He crashed face-first into the snow. The guard didn't stop. Instead, his whip cracked across the child's back. "Get up." The boy tried. His legs shook violently. Another strike landed. The cub in Lyra's arms whimpered. She held it tighter. "Please. Don't make a sound." The boy slowly pushed himself upright. His face was bruised. His lips were blue from cold. Yet, he didn't cry. He simply kept walking. Something inside Lyra broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like old ice finally giving way beneath too much weight. The caravan disappeared deeper into the forest. The voices faded. Only then did Lyra finally breathe again. She looked down at the little cub. "We're leaving." She turned toward home. Behind her, the snow moved. The same frightened boy she had watched moments earlier had slipped free during the confusion. He stayed several yards behind her. Silent. Careful. Too afraid to call out. Too desperate to stop following. Lyra never noticed him. Not yet. The forest grew darker as clouds covered the moon. Snow began falling harder. The cub shivered against her chest. "It's all right," she whispered. "We're almost home." Far behind them, the hunters reached the empty trap. One dropped to his knees beside the broken iron. "It's gone." Another studied the blood. "No. Someone freed it." The oldest hunter crouched beside enormous paw prints leading away from the clearing. His weathered face slowly lost its color. "Do you fools even know what you've lost?" The younger men exchanged confused looks. The old hunter swallowed hard. This wasn't an ordinary cub. He pointed toward the delicate silver markings barely visible beneath the blood-stained white fur left on the trap. There are only 2 wolves born with these markings. The Alpha King's bloodline. Silence followed. One hunter whispered, "The royal family." The old man nodded. "If that cub dies, the Northern Kingdom will tear this forest apart." Another hunter looked toward the distant mountains. What if someone already found it? The old hunter slowly stood. His eyes grew cold. Then whoever is hiding that cub has unknowingly declared war against the Alpha King. Miles away, Lyra finally reached her small wooden cottage hidden among snow-covered pines. Warm light flickered faintly through the frosted windows. She gently pushed open the old wooden door. The little wolf immediately relaxed inside her arms. It could smell safety. She placed it beside the fireplace. The cub curled into a tiny white ball near the flames. Only then did Lyra notice something strange. There were fresh footprints leading to her front door. Small footprints. Barefoot. She slowly turned. Outside, a frightened little boy stood trembling beneath the snowfall. The same child from the slave caravan. He looked at her with terrified brown eyes. He didn't speak. He simply waited, as though one more closed door would end whatever hope he still carried. Lyra stared at him for a long moment. Then she quietly stepped aside. "You don't have to stand in the cold." The boy hesitated. "You can come inside." His eyes filled with tears he had been holding back for far too long. He stepped across the doorway without a word. Behind him, far beyond the trees, a lone wolf's howl echoed across the frozen mountains. It sounded less like a call, and more like a warning. Because before sunrise, the Alpha King's army would begin searching every home in the northern forest. And they would stop at Lyra's door. The fire burned softly through the longest hours of the night. Its gentle crackle was the only sound inside the little cottage, pushing back the bitter cold that pressed against the wooden walls. Outside, the forest remained buried beneath snow. Inside, 3 lonely souls who had never expected to meet shared the same quiet shelter. Lyra knelt beside the fireplace, carefully washing the blood from the white cub's injured leg. Warm water slowly turned pink as it carried away the frozen stains. The little wolf winced but never tried to bite her again. Instead, it simply watched. Its bright blue eyes never left her face. Almost as if it was trying to understand why someone would choose kindness when fear would have been easier. Lyra tore another clean strip from her old linen shirt and wrapped the wound carefully. "There," she whispered. "You'll have a scar." The cub gently touched her wrist with its nose. A tiny gesture. Yet somehow, it felt like gratitude. Behind her, the frightened boy remained standing near the door. He had not moved since entering. His hands were still shaking. His clothes were little more than torn pieces of cloth stiff with frozen mud. Lyra glanced toward him. "You can sit." He hesitated. "I won't send you back." The words seemed impossible for him to believe. Slowly, very slowly, he stepped closer to the fire. Lyra poured warm broth into a wooden bowl and placed it in front of him. The smell alone made his eyes widen. He stared at the food as though he had forgotten what kindness looked like. "You should eat while it's warm." The boy looked up nervously. Is it really for me?" Lyra nodded. "Yes." He picked up the bowl with trembling hands. The first spoonful disappeared almost instantly. Then another. Then another. He wasn't eating. He was surviving. Lyra quietly looked away, giving him the dignity of pretending not to notice his desperation. After several long moments, the boy finally slowed down. His voice cracked. "Thank you." She smiled gently. "You don't have to thank someone for feeding you." The little wolf limped across the floor and settled beside the boy's feet. To Lyra's surprise, the child smiled. It was only for a heartbeat. But it was the first genuine smile that had touched his face all night. "What is your name?" Lyra asked softly. The boy lowered his eyes. "Elias." "And yours?" "Lyra." He repeated it quietly, as though afraid he might forget the name of the first person who had shown him mercy in years. The room fell silent again. Snow tapped softly against the windows. The flames danced across the walls. For the first time in a very long while, the cottage felt less lonely. Hours passed. The storm outside grew heavier. Elias eventually fell asleep sitting beside the fireplace, still holding the empty wooden bowl. The white cub curled against his side as if protecting him from dreams. Lyra covered the boy with her only spare blanket. She stood beside the window. Something bothered her. Not the storm. The silence. Forests were never completely quiet. Tonight, even the wolves had stopped howling. She slowly unlatched the window. Cold air rushed inside. She listened carefully. Nothing. Not even the wind. Then, far away, a single horn echoed through the mountains. Low, deep, ancient. Lyra froze. She had heard stories about that sound when she was a little girl. The horn of the Northern Guard. It was only blown when the Alpha King's army marched. A second horn answered. Then a third. Closer. Much closer. Her heart sank. They found the trail. She quietly closed the window. The cub suddenly lifted its head. Its ears stood alert. Then it let out a tiny nervous whine. Almost immediately, hundreds of distant wolves answered. The sound rolled through the forest like thunder. Elias awoke with a frightened gasp. What was that? Lyra did not answer. She already knew. Before sunrise, the snow stopped falling. The silence returned. Then came the sound of hooves. Not dozens. Hundreds. The earth itself seemed to tremble beneath them. Lyra opened the cottage door. The cold morning air struck her face. She took one slow step outside. And stopped. Every path leading away from her home had disappeared beneath rows of mounted warriors. Grey cloaks fluttered in the icy wind. Massive wolves stood beside armored riders. Silver banners bearing the royal crest moved gently above the snow. Not a single soldier spoke. Not one horse shifted impatiently. The discipline itself felt terrifying. It was an army that had learned silence before battle. Elias slowly stepped into the doorway behind Lyra. His frightened whisper barely escaped his lips. There's so many. Lyra quietly moved in front of him. Instinct. Nothing more. She wasn't thinking. She was protecting. The little white cub limped outside. The moment it appeared, every warrior lowered his head. Even the wolves bowed. The movement swept through the army like a silent wave. Elias blinked in confusion. Lyra felt her heartbeat quicken. Who was this little creature? From the front of the formation, one rider urged his great black wolf forward. He wore polished silver armor beneath a heavy white cloak. His face was weathered by countless winters. A long scar crossed one cheek. Yet his calm grey eyes held neither hatred nor arrogance. Only duty. He stopped several steps away. You are Lyra of the northern border. It wasn't a question. She nodded once. I am. His gaze shifted briefly toward the cub. Then back to her. You are sheltering someone who belongs to the crown. Lyra glanced at the little wolf. He belongs to himself. A few soldiers exchanged surprised glances. The commander studied her carefully. You know what creature that is. I know he was bleeding. And I know hunters left him to die. The commander's jaw tightened. You interfered with royal affairs. I stopped suffering. Silence followed. The cold wind carried snow across the clearing. Finally, the commander spoke again. That cub is Prince Rowan. Elias gasped softly. Lyra frowned. Prince. The youngest brother of our Alpha King. The words settled heavily between them. Lyra slowly looked down at the little wolf. The cub blinked up at her innocently. Nothing about him looked royal. He simply looked frightened. You expect me to believe a prince was caught in a hunter's trap? The commander lowered his eyes briefly. No. I expect you to wonder why. For the first time, something didn't sound right. His voice carried guilt, not accusation. Before Lyra could respond, another rider galloped toward the commander. The council's orders have arrived. He handed over a sealed scroll. The commander read it silently. His expression darkened. When he looked back at Lyra, something had changed. The High Council declares that anyone hiding the royal heir has committed treason. Elias clutched Lyra's sleeve. Treason. The commander continued quietly. Under ancient pack law, the punishment is death. The words hung in the frozen air. Several soldiers lowered their eyes. None seemed pleased. Lyra looked from one face to another. She saw discipline. She saw exhaustion. She saw men obeying laws they no longer believed in. Then she asked one simple question. If your prince had remained in that trap, would your laws have saved him? No one answered. Not the commander. Not the soldiers. Not even the wolves. Because everyone standing there knew the truth. The answer was no. Far beyond the army, hidden among the towering pines, a solitary figure watched everything. He stood beside an enormous silver wolf. Snow settled silently across his dark cloak. His silver eyes never left the woman standing barefoot in front of an army. He had expected fear. He had expected bargaining. Instead, she defended a child who was not hers. She challenged warriors without raising her voice. And she still refused to surrender the cub until she understood the truth. His wolf stirred uneasily inside him. Something felt familiar. Not her face. Not her voice. Something deeper. A quiet pull. A strange calm he had not felt since childhood. He frowned. Impossible. The mate bond did not feel like this. It certainly did not begin with a human woman standing in the snow. Yet, his instincts refused to look away. Behind him, one of his captains approached carefully. My king. The man never turned around. What do you see? The captain followed his gaze. A stubborn woman. The Alpha King answered softly. No. I see someone who doesn't know she's standing between a kingdom and the truth we've been searching for. The captain looked confused. But before he could ask another question, the Alpha King stepped forward. At last, he was ready to meet the woman who had unknowingly changed the course of his kingdom. And neither of them realized. Their first meeting would awaken memories that neither heart was prepared to face. The morning remained strangely quiet. Not because the army had left. Because no one dared to move. The forest seemed caught between two worlds, one where Lyra had simply rescued a wounded animal, and another where she had unknowingly protected the last surviving prince of the northern bloodline. Snow drifted gently through the air. No orders were shouted. No swords were drawn. Hundreds of warriors simply waited. As though every heartbeat depended on someone who had not yet spoken. Lyra stood in front of her cottage with Elias slightly behind her. The little white cub remained pressed against her boots, refusing to leave her side despite the endless rows of royal soldiers waiting only a few steps away. The commander lowered his head respectfully. He has arrived. He stepped aside. Every warrior did the same. A path slowly opened through the center of the army. No drums announced him. No banners were raised higher. No one cried out his title. The silence itself became his introduction. A tall man walked slowly through the falling snow. His dark cloak brushed across the untouched ground. Silver embroidery marked the edge of his collar, but there was nothing overly decorated about him. His clothing was practical, worn by years of travel rather than palace comfort. His boots carried dried mud. His gloves bore old cuts. Even from a distance, he looked less like a king, and more like a warrior who had forgotten how to rest. His face carried quiet strength. High cheekbones. Dark hair touched lightly with frost. A short scar crossed one eyebrow. But it was his eyes that held everyone's attention. Silver. Clear. Heavy with memories that refused to fade. He never looked toward the soldiers. He never acknowledged the commander. His gaze settled only on the little white cub. Everything else disappeared. The cub lifted its head. Its ears twitched. For one long heartbeat. Neither moved. Then the tiny wolf suddenly let out a soft cry. It limped forward as quickly as its injured leg allowed. The mysterious man stopped walking. Slowly. Very slowly. He lowered himself onto one knee. His gloved hands rested open against the snow. No command. No whistle. No force. Only patience. The cub reached him. Without hesitation, it climbed into his arms. The moment it buried its face against the man's chest, something inside the Alpha King finally broke. His eyes closed. His shoulders trembled almost imperceptibly. He pressed his forehead gently against the cub's head. "You came back." His voice was barely louder than the wind. "I thought I had lost you too." For the first time, the soldiers witnessed something they had not seen in years. Their king smiled. It wasn't the proud smile of a ruler. It wasn't victory. It wasn't relief. It was the quiet smile of an older brother who had spent countless sleepless nights believing the last piece of his family had disappeared forever. The warmth lasted only a moment. Then it vanished. He opened his eyes. The weight returned. Grief settled back across his face as naturally as breathing. He carefully examined the cub's injured leg. His fingers paused over Lyra's bandages. They were changed recently. The commander answered softly. The woman treated him herself. The king's eyes lifted. For the first time, he looked directly at Lyra. She expected authority. Instead, she found exhaustion. He studied her calmly, not as someone judging, as someone trying to understand. "You saved him." His words carried no accusation, only quiet certainty. Lyra nodded once. "He was suffering." "You knew hunters could return." "Yes." "You still stayed." She answered simply. "Someone had to." Silence settled again. Neither looked away. Neither seemed interested in winning the conversation. The Alpha King slowly stood. He stepped closer. Close enough to see the scratches covering Lyra's hands from forcing open the steel trap. Close enough to notice the missing strip of cloth torn from her sleeve. Close enough to realize she had used her own clothing to stop his brother's bleeding. "You gave up part of your only winter shirt." Lyra glanced briefly at the torn fabric. "I can sew another." His expression changed almost invisibly. Most people would have demanded a reward. She hadn't even mentioned what she had sacrificed. The little cub twisted inside his brother's arms. To everyone's surprise, it reached toward Lyra again. Tiny paws stretched desperately. It wanted her. The Alpha King looked down in confusion. "Rowan." The cub whimpered. Then it climbed out of his arms and limped back across the snow until it reached Lyra once more. The soldiers stared in disbelief. Prince Rowan leaned against Lyra's leg exactly as he had before. The commander whispered quietly. "He has chosen her." Another warrior frowned. Royal wolves never trust strangers. The Alpha King said nothing. But inside, questions multiplied. A rider suddenly galloped into the clearing. His horse breathed heavily from exhaustion. "My king!" He jumped down and immediately knelt. A message from the High Council. The sealed parchment bore the ancient crest of the council. The Alpha King broke the wax calmly. His eyes moved silently across the page. The atmosphere changed. His jaw tightened. The commander noticed immediately. "My king." The Alpha King folded the letter slowly. "They demand the woman be arrested." Elias clutched Lyra's cloak. "What?" The rider swallowed nervously. "The council claims she interfered with royal property." He hesitated. "Attacked licensed hunters." Another pause. "And assisted the escape of a runaway slave." The little boy's face turned pale. "I didn't escape." His voice shook. They were taking me away." No one answered him. Because everyone already knew the truth. The council cared far more about broken laws than broken children. The commander spoke carefully. "My king, ancient law leaves little choice." The Alpha King remained silent. His eyes never left Lyra. She did not step backward. She did not plead. She simply rested one reassuring hand on Elias's shoulder. The child slowly stopped trembling beneath her touch. The king noticed. Every soldier noticed. She protected others without thinking about herself. Then Lyra quietly asked, "If I had left him there?" She looked toward Elias. "Would your laws have praised me?" No one answered. She continued. If I had ignored your brother's cries. She nodded toward Rowan. Would that have made me innocent? The questions drifted through the frozen clearing. Even the wind seemed unwilling to interrupt. Finally, she looked directly at the Alpha King. I don't understand. Tell me honestly. When did helping someone become a crime? The word struck him harder than any blade. Not because they challenged his authority. Because someone else had once asked him almost the same question. Years ago. Another winter. Another battlefield. His mother had stood before frightened villagers while soldiers argued about ancient laws. She had looked at him, smiled gently, then said, "A crown means nothing if it cannot protect those who have no voice." Only moments later, she had died shielding children during the betrayal that destroyed the royal family. The memory returned with painful clarity. Snow-stained red. His mother's hand slipping from his. His younger brother crying somewhere beyond the smoke. His own helplessness. He had buried those memories beneath years of war. Now, one ordinary woman had uncovered them with a single question. Something shifted inside him. Not love. Not yet. Respect. Deep. Unshakable respect. The commander lowered his voice. My king. The council expects your answer before nightfall. The Alpha King looked around at his waiting soldiers. Then at Elias. Then at Rowan. Finally, his gaze settled once more on Lyra. He spoke calmly. So far. Every warrior leaned forward. I have seen a woman save my brother. He looked toward Elias. I have seen her protect an abandoned child. Then back toward the commander. I have yet to see the criminal your council describes. Silence spread through the army. Several soldiers exchanged stunned glances. The commander bowed his head. My king. The council will not accept this. I know. They may accuse you of defying ancient law. The Alpha King's expression remained unreadable. Then let them accuse me. He turned toward Lyra. You will come to the capital. Elias gripped her sleeve tighter. Lyra asked quietly. As your prisoner. The Alpha King held her gaze for a long moment. Then answered. As the woman whose truth deserves to be heard. For the first time since the army had arrived. Fear eased from Elias's eyes. But far away. Inside the towering walls of the capital. Powerful men were already preparing another story. A story where witnesses disappeared. Where innocent people became criminals. And where a woman brave enough to ask the wrong question would never be allowed to return home. The journey to the capital had begun. And neither Lyra nor the Alpha King knew that the greatest enemy waiting ahead was not hiding beyond the kingdom's borders. It was already seated inside the council chamber. The journey to the capital lasted 2 days. Snow covered every mountain pass, and the royal convoy moved slowly through the frozen valleys. No one spoke unless it was necessary. The silence between the soldiers felt heavier than the armor they wore. Lyra rode inside a small wagon with Elias and the white wolf cub curled beside them. Every few minutes the cub would lift his head, as if searching for someone. The king's nearby, Elias whispered. Lyra looked at the little wolf. How do you know? He only does that when he hears his brother. Lyra smiled faintly. You've learned a lot about wolves. Elias lowered his eyes. I had to. The traders sold children who carried wolf blood for more money. The words settled heavily between them. Lyra reached over and gently squeezed his hand. You'll never belong to them again. Outside, hoofbeats echoed against frozen stone. Several hours later, the towering walls of the northern capital appeared through the snowfall. The city looked magnificent. Tall towers stretched into grey skies. Ancient banners bearing the royal crest fluttered above enormous gates. But beneath its beauty, Lyra sensed something cold. Cities built on fear often looked impressive from a distance. Inside, they rarely felt like home. The palace gates opened. Rows of guards lined the entrance as the convoy entered the courtyard. Servants hurried between buildings. Nobles watched from balconies. The moment Lyra stepped down from the wagon, Dozens of curious eyes turned toward her. There she is. The woman who stole the royal cub. I heard she's a spy. No, they say she bewitched the king. Rumors spread faster than the winter wind. Lyra ignored every whisper. Instead, she helped Elias climb down safely before checking the bandage around the cub's injured leg. From across the courtyard, Alpha King Soellen watched quietly. His commanders waited for orders. Instead, he simply nodded once toward Lyra. It was a small gesture. Yet somehow, it reassured her. The High Council chamber stood at the center of the palace. Massive stone pillars surrounded a circular hall where 12 carved seats overlooked the floor below. Every elder wore dark ceremonial robes trimmed with silver. Their faces appeared calm. Too calm. As though the outcome had already been decided before anyone entered. A herald struck the marble floor with his staff. The hearing begins. Lyra stood alone in the center. Elias remained behind 2 royal guards. Soellen sat upon the throne reserved for the Alpha King. Yet even from there, he seemed less powerful than the council surrounding him. The eldest councilman rose slowly. His voice echoed through the chamber. Lyra of the northern border. You stand accused of interfering with licensed hunters, obstructing royal authority, and assisting the escape of property belonging to registered merchants. Property. The word made Lyra's expression harden. She glanced toward Elias. The boy lowered his head. To these men, he wasn't a child. He was cargo. The elder continued. How do you answer these charges? Lyra met his gaze without hesitation. I saved lives. Soft murmurs spread across the chamber. Another council member leaned forward. You admit taking the royal cub. I rescued an injured cub. You admit hiding a runaway slave. I sheltered a frightened child. The elder frowned. You continue to ignore the law. Lyra answered quietly. No, I question a law that forgets compassion. The chamber fell silent. Even several guards exchanged uneasy looks. Then something unexpected happened. Elias stepped forward. I know him. Every eye turned toward the boy. He pointed toward a heavy-set council member seated near the end of the chamber. That man. He came to the traders' camp. The nobleman's expression remained perfectly composed. I have never seen this child. Elias shook his head urgently. You wore a green ring. You gave the trader a bag of silver. You told him healthy children should be sent south. His small voice trembled. But, I remember. The chamber erupted into whispers. The accused councilman laughed softly. A frightened orphan imagines many things. He has suffered trauma. Several elders nodded in agreement. One even sighed sympathetically. The boy's courage began fading. Lyra crossed the chamber without asking permission. She knelt beside Elias. You don't have to be afraid. I believe you. The child looked at her. Tears filled his eyes. You do. She smiled gently. Truth doesn't become smaller because powerful people deny it. Across the chamber, Soellen watched every moment in silence. Something about the exchange disturbed him. Not because Elias had spoken. Because several council members seemed frightened. Not angry. Frightened. As though the boy knew something dangerous. The hearing paused until morning. Royal servants escorted Lyra to guest chambers rather than prison cells. It was an unusual decision. One that angered more than a few council members. Late that evening, unable to sleep, Lyra wandered through a quiet corridor searching for fresh air. Instead, she found the royal library. Rows upon rows of ancient books stretched toward the ceiling. Maps covered the walls. Dust floated through golden candlelight. She stepped inside almost without thinking. History had always comforted her. Books rarely lied. As she searched through shelves filled with old border records, one loose stone beneath a cabinet caught her attention. Curious, she knelt and carefully lifted it. Hidden beneath the floor rested a weathered leather ledger. Its pages were filled with names, dates, amounts of silver, village records. Transport routes. And one phrase repeated again and again. Northern transfers. Lyra's heartbeat quickened. She turned another page. Beside several payments appeared the same signature. Councillor Marin. The very man Elias had recognized. Her breathing slowed. This was no misunderstanding. Someone inside the High Council had been funding slave caravans for years. She carefully closed the ledger. Footsteps echoed somewhere beyond the library doors. Lyra quickly concealed the book beneath her cloak. She didn't yet know who she could trust. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tomorrow's trial was no longer about whether she had broken the law. It was about whether the truth would survive long enough to be heard. The library had always been the quietest room in the Mountain Palace. Long after the council chambers emptied and the servants retired, only the soft crackle of the fireplace disturbed the silence. Shelves of ancient books stretched toward the high stone ceiling, their worn leather bindings carrying the weight of generations. Lyra preferred this place. Books never judged. They simply waited. She stood on a wooden ladder, carefully returning a repaired map to its shelf. One corner had nearly fallen away with age, but after hours of patient work, the faded ink once again revealed forgotten rivers and old pack boundaries. "You have steady hands." The deep voice came from behind her. She turned carefully. Soellen stood near the doorway without his royal cloak or ceremonial armor. Tonight he wore only a dark wool tunic, making him look less like a king and more like a man who had wandered into the library seeking peace. "I didn't hear you come in," Lyra said. "You were concentrating." She smiled faintly. "I suppose I was." Instead of approaching immediately, Soellen walked toward a nearby shelf and traced a finger along the spine of an old history book. "I used to hide here." Lyra looked at him with quiet curiosity. "As a child?" He nodded. "My mother always knew where to find me." "What did you read?" "Stories about rulers who made fewer mistakes than I have." His answer carried no bitterness, only honesty. Lyra climbed down from the ladder and brushed a little dust from her sleeves. "I don't think history remembers anyone without mistakes." Soellen looked at her. "Perhaps. But it remembers the cost of them." For a moment neither spoke. The silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward. Near the fireplace, the little white wolf cub slept soundly on a thick rug, one ear twitching every few seconds as though dreaming of running through snowy forests. Not far away, Elias sat at a small wooden table practicing his letters with charcoal on rough paper. He frowned in concentration. "That still looks strange," he muttered. Lyra walked over and knelt beside him. "Try moving your hand more slowly." She gently guided his fingers. "There." The next letter came out almost perfectly. Elias grinned proudly. "I did it." "You did." Soellen watched from across the room. He couldn't remember the last time laughter had echoed inside these walls. Not forced laughter from celebrations. Real laughter. The kind that made a room feel warmer. The cub suddenly lifted his head and trotted toward Elias, nudging the boy's arm until the charcoal rolled off the table. Elias laughed. "I think he wants attention more than lessons." The little wolf barked softly in agreement. Lyra scratched behind the cub's ears, earning another happy sound. For the first time in many years, the Royal Library felt less like a hall of forgotten history and more like a home. Soellen slowly crossed the room. "I brought something." From inside a leather satchel, he removed a weathered book wrapped in faded cloth. The cover was cracked with age. "My mother's favorite collection of stories," he said quietly. "I haven't opened it since she died." Lyra accepted it carefully, almost afraid to touch something so precious. "You trust me with this?" "I do." She looked into his silver eyes. "Why?" He considered the question before answering. "Because you repair things instead of replacing them." She glanced down at the fragile book in her hands. "So do you." He gave a small, surprised smile. "I've been trying." The fire shifted softly, casting warm light across the room. Outside, snow drifted past the tall windows, but inside, the cold seemed very far away. After a while, Elias yawned. Lyra covered him with a blanket where he had fallen asleep at the table, his unfinished writing still scattered around him. The cub curled against the boy's feet without being asked. Llewellyn watched the pair for several quiet moments. They trust each other completely. They've both known fear, Lyra replied. Sometimes that's enough. He nodded slowly. And what about us? The question slipped out before he could stop it. Lyra looked at him, surprised. I think. She chose her words carefully. I think trust grows the same way these old books survive. How? One careful page at a time. Neither spoke again. There was nothing left to add. The silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt shared. Beyond the library windows, the wind carried a distant wolf's howl across the mountains. The cub lifted his head for only a moment before settling back beside Elias. Inside the warm glow of the library, surrounded by stories of the past, forlorn souls found something none of them had expected. Not destiny. Not certainty. Just the quiet beginning of belonging. And sometimes, that was where the strongest bonds were born. The night arrived without stars. Dark clouds swallowed the moon, leaving only the pale glow of snow to guide the road that wound through the mountains. The cold settled deep into the valley, but Lyra barely noticed it. She urged her horse forward, her cloak snapping in the icy wind. Something was wrong. She had searched the palace for Elias only to find his room empty, the blanket lying on the floor and the window left open. The white wolf cub paced anxiously, whining toward the northern gate as if trying to lead her somewhere. She trusted his instincts. Now, she followed them. The forest grew quieter with every mile until a faint sound reached her ears. Chains. Not loud. Just enough to make her pull the reins. Ahead, hidden beneath towering pines, several covered wagons rolled slowly across the snow. Armed riders surrounded them, carrying torches that painted the darkness in flickering orange light. The cub let out a low growl. Lyra's heart sank. Elias. She slid from her horse and crouched behind a fallen tree, watching carefully. Through the wooden bars of the last wagon, she saw small hands gripping cold iron. Children. Dozens of them. Some were awake, others leaned against each other, too exhausted even to cry. Then she saw him. Elias sat near the back of the cage, his face bruised but determined. When he noticed the white cub peeking through the trees, his eyes widened with hope. He didn't call out. He knew silence was their only chance. Lyra counted the guards. Too many. She could never free the children alone. For a brief moment, doubt crept into her heart. Then she heard another sound. A wolf's howl. Deep. Powerful. It echoed through the mountains with such force that every horse in the caravan became restless. The guards looked around nervously. What was that? Before anyone could answer, another howl answered from the opposite ridge. Then another. The mountains themselves seemed to awaken. From the darkness emerged enormous wolves, moving with calm confidence rather than rage. Behind them rode armored warriors wearing the silver crest of the Northern Kingdom. At their front was Llewellyn. His expression remained calm, but his silver eyes never left the slave wagons. He raised one hand. His warriors stopped instantly. No battle cry. No reckless charge. Only perfect discipline. The leader of the caravan laughed nervously. You have no authority here. These children belong to licensed merchants. Llewellyn's voice was quiet. They belong to no one. The trader drew his sword. You'll start a war over slaves. The Alpha King stepped forward. No. I'll end one. The guards rushed toward him. Everything happened in seconds. Royal warriors intercepted the attackers before they could reach the wagons. The clash of steel echoed through the valley, but Llewellyn never chased fleeing enemies. His eyes remained fixed on the children. Protect the prisoners first, he ordered. Leave the guilty to us. Lyra didn't wait for permission. She sprinted toward the last wagon while the guards were distracted. A heavy iron lock secured the cage. She searched desperately until she spotted a hammer lying beside a broken wheel. Gripping it tightly, she swung with all her strength. The first strike cracked the lock. The second bent it. The third shattered it completely. The iron chain fell into the snow. Elias stared in disbelief. You came back. Lyra smiled through tired eyes. I promised. She pulled the cage door open. One by one, the children stepped into the freezing night, uncertain whether they were truly free. Some hesitated. Others immediately embraced one another. The white cub barked happily, weaving between them as if encouraging them forward. Nearby, another wagon remained locked. Before Lyra could reach it, Llewellyn grasped the thick iron bars with both hands. His muscles tightened. The ancient steel groaned. Then, with one tremendous pull, the bars split apart. The opening was just wide enough for the frightened children to climb through. No one spoke. Even the royal soldiers paused for a heartbeat. The children emerged slowly, blinking at the open sky as though freedom itself felt unfamiliar. One little girl wrapped her arms around Lyra without saying a word. Another reached for Llewellyn's hand. The Alpha King knelt so she wouldn't have to look up at him. You are safe now, he said gently. The child nodded, tears running silently down her face. Soon every wagon stood empty. The traders had fled or surrendered. The valley grew quiet once more. Lyra looked at the abandoned cages lined along the snowy road. So many lives, she whispered. So much suffering. Llewellyn walked beside her. It ends tonight. He handed her a burning torch. She looked at it, then at the empty wagons. Instead of keeping it, she turned toward Elias. I think this choice belongs to you. The boy accepted the torch with shaking hands. He walked slowly toward the first wagon. For a long moment, he simply stood there. Then he lowered the flame. Dry wood caught almost instantly. Fire spread from one wagon to the next, climbing the wooden frames until bright flames pushed back the darkness. The children watched in silence. No one cheered. No one celebrated. They simply stood together, watching the cages that had stolen so many futures disappear into ash. Elias slipped his small hand into Lyra's. I don't want anyone else to ride in those wagons. She squeezed his hand gently. They never will. Llewellyn stood beside them as sparks drifted into the night sky like tiny stars. For the first time in many years, he felt something unfamiliar settle inside his heart. Not victory. Not relief. Hope. Because kingdoms were not changed only by kings. Sometimes. They were changed by one woman who refused to leave a frightened child behind. The first light of dawn touched the palace towers with pale gold, soft enough to make the cold stone seem almost warm. The great courtyard was filled long before sunrise. Pack leaders from every northern territory stood in quiet rows. Warriors rested their hands on the hilts of their swords. Villagers gathered behind the royal guards, whispering to one another, waiting for the truth that had shaken the kingdom. At the center of the courtyard stood Lyra. She wore the same simple grey cloak she had arrived in days before. She had been offered fine silks and jewels. She had refused them all. Across from her stood Alpha King Llewellyn. He wore his royal cloak, but there was little pride in his expression. His silver eyes carried only quiet determination. Behind them, Elias stood with the rescued children. For the first time since his village had fallen, he no longer looked afraid. He looked hopeful. One by one, the children stepped forward. No speeches had been prepared. No one had told them what to say. They simply spoke the truth. A little girl described being taken from her home during the harvest. A young boy remembered watching his parents fight to protect him before he was dragged away. Another child recognized the noble who had paid the slave traders. With every testimony, the silence in the courtyard grew heavier. Several council members lowered their heads. Others could no longer meet the eyes of the people they had sworn to protect. Finally, royal guards carried forward the hidden ledgers that had been discovered inside the palace library. The old books were placed on a wooden table where everyone could see them. Llewellyn opened the first ledger. The pages listed names, payments, villages, routes, children reduced to numbers, lives measured by profit. The king closed the book slowly. There will be no denying the truth. His calm voice echoed across the courtyard. The law was never meant to protect cruelty. It was meant to protect our people. No one argued. There was nothing left to defend. The guilty councillors were stripped of their ceremonial cloaks. No chains were placed upon them. No public humiliation followed. Instead, Llewellyn looked at them with quiet disappointment. You betrayed the crown. You betrayed every child who believed this kingdom would keep them safe. One elder looked up with fear. You would spare us. Llewellyn answered after a long silence. If justice becomes revenge, then today's children will inherit tomorrow's hatred. You will answer for your crimes. But this kingdom will not become what you made it. The courtyard remained silent. Even the oldest warriors lowered their heads in respect. Strength was easy to find on a battlefield. Mercy required something greater. As the proceedings came to an end, the white wolf cub wandered away from the crowd. He crossed the courtyard with slow, careful steps. Everyone watched. Without hesitation, he stopped in front of Lyra. For a long moment, he simply looked into her eyes. Then he gently pressed his forehead against hers. The world became strangely still. A warm breeze moved through the courtyard despite the winter air. The banners fluttered. Every wolf present lifted its head at the same moment. A low chorus of howls rolled across the mountains. Not a cry of warning. A cry of recognition. The royal healer smiled softly. It has awakened. Lyra blinked in surprise. What has? Before anyone answered, Llewellyn felt it. A warmth spread quietly through his chest. Not painful. Not overwhelming. Comforting. Like finding a path home after years of walking through darkness. His wolf, silent for so long, became completely calm. It recognized something his mind had not yet understood. Across the courtyard, Lyra placed a hand over her own heart. She felt the same quiet warmth. The healer stepped forward. The ancient bond does not appear because two hearts desire one another. It appears when two souls repeatedly choose compassion over fear. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some smiled. Others simply watched in quiet wonder. Llewellyn removed the heavy silver crown from his head. The gesture surprised everyone. He walked toward Lyra alone. No guards followed him. No advisors stood beside him. Only the man remained. He stopped a few steps away. I spent years believing strength meant carrying every burden alone. His voice was gentle enough that only those closest could hear. Then you walked into my kingdom carrying nothing but kindness. Lyra smiled through tears. I wasn't trying to change a kingdom. I know. He returned the smile. That's why you did. The morning sun climbed above the mountains, bathing the courtyard in warm light. Children laughed nearby as the white cub chased snowflakes around Elias. The sound filled every empty corner of the palace. Llewellyn extended his hand. I do not ask you to stand beside my throne. I ask whether you will walk beside me. Lyra looked at the hand for a long moment. Then she reached forward. Their hands met. No flash of magic filled the sky. No dramatic storm appeared. Only a quiet feeling settled over everyone present. Peace. The white cub let out a joyful bark. Elias laughed, and soon the other children laughed with him. For the first time in many years, the palace echoed with hope instead of fear. As the wolves lifted one final howl toward the brightening sky, the kingdom understood something its laws had forgotten long ago. The strongest bond had never been created by power. It had been created by a woman who chose kindness when no one was watching, and by a king who finally chose compassion over fear. Together, they welcomed a new dawn, one where no child would be treated as property, no voice would be ignored, and no act of mercy would ever again be called a crime.